Good evening and welcome. You're watching Newsbreak with me, Sanket Upadhyay. Tomorrow is a big budget day and today the economic survey was released. There are some critical findings in the economic survey. Let's quickly put those findings on the screen right now. Number one, it says India is positioned to ascend to pre-pandemic growth path in FY 2023. Let's put that on screen. Capital expenditure, one of the growth driver of Indian economy. Indian rupee performed well compared to other emerging markets. Economic growth to be boosted from measures to boost manufacturing. Economic growth to be boosted from expansion of public digital platforms. GDP growth forecast, and this by the way is the most important, in the range of 6 to 6.8% for FY24, which not many people agree with actually, but that's the forecast from the economic survey. It also says that enhanced employment generation is being seen. Gross non-performing assets ratio of commercial banks is at a 7-year low. Social sector expenditure up at 21.3 lakh crores if you compare it to 9.1 lakh crore in FY16. Lots of other information also, but without wasting much time, let's quickly introduce former RBI Governor, Mr. Subbarao, and I would like to tell, for full disclosure, that this interview was recorded yesterday. Dr. Subbarao, thank you very much. First of all, I wanted to ask you, what should one ideally expect from this budget?
Well, this budget, like every other budget, must focus on growth. Okay, but we know that growth is not sufficient. It is necessary, but not sufficient. Let me tell you why. The economy is expected to clock growth of 7% this year. So that makes us the fastest growing large economy in the world. That's a matter for comfort, matter for relief. But we must also see the reality behind that. If you take the last 3 years, growth on average has been about 2.9%. That's much too low compared to what we need. The per capita income last year, fiscal 21-22, was lower than the real per capita income the last year before the pandemic, 2018-19. What this means is that there's been a welfare loss. And the burden of this welfare loss has been borne largely by the low-income segments of the population. So I believe the budget must focus on growth, but also must focus equally on ensuring that the benefits of growth are widely shared.
Dr. Subbarao, you wrote an article recently where you spoke about development and not revdi, jobs and not revdi. Revdi as in not the sweet, but of course by now everybody knows, it involves budgetary expenditure for political gains. But don't you think the most important question over here is the definition of the word revdi? Because one person's revdi can be another person's welfare scheme. And that is important.
Well, it's very difficult, okay? But let me tell you this, that certain welfare spending is absolutely necessary, especially in a poor country like ours, to provide safety nets to the vulnerable segments of the population. So we cannot eliminate welfare spending altogether. But the question is, how much should the welfare spending be given all the other budget constraints? Ideally, if you had no budget constraints at all, you can justify possibly every levy. But because we have a welfare constraint, we have a budget constraint, we must see what is the minimum necessary spending on providing safety nets to the most vulnerable segments of the population. And also equally spend on laying the foundation for future growth. Because you must remember this, that our spending on revenues, as you call it, or let's call it welfare spending, is coming out of borrowing. Ideally, every debt must pay for itself. So if you are borrowing money and spending it on welfare, you are not generating the money for servicing that loan. Therefore, there is, you'll get deeper and deeper into debt problems. So because our welfare spending comes out of borrowing, we must be very, very circumspect on what welfare spending there should be, how much there should be, and exactly what schemes we must be spending that on.
Dr. Subbarao, don't you think that inflation continues to remain a huge challenge for the government? Now, obviously not at the alarming levels in our subcontinent, but definitely not in the sweet spot or the comfort zone that one would ideally expect. I mean, it breaches the 6% mark.
Well, the RBI has done a tremendous job over the last 1.5 years in bringing inflation down. The last reading, I think, for December, which came out on January 14, was 5.7% inflation, which is slightly below the upper limit of the inflation target band. But I've also seen commentary that much of this decline in inflation over the last 3-4 months has been because vegetable prices have come down and that core inflation is still strong and firm, in fact, above 6%. So I think the RBI must remain focused on inflation control. They'll have to tighten further, I believe, at least a little more in their February meeting. They've got to continue to do liquidity management. That's what RBI can do. But at the same time, there's a responsibility for the government as well to control inflation, because fiscal spending is inflationary. So the government must, as much as it must spend where necessary, must also restrain on how much debt it's going to generate, how much fiscal deficit it's going to incur. So there's a job for the government as well in restraining the fiscal deficit. And then the third variable in inflation management is exchange rate. To the extent that the exchange rate, the rupee depreciates, it's inflationary. And over the last 1 year, the rupee depreciated by about 10% or so. That's been one of the pressures for inflation. So it's important that the rupee value is, I wouldn't say stabilized, to control volatility in the exchange rate so that inflation impact coming from exchange rate is minimized.
Dr. Subbarao, my last question, what according to you could be those few important things that the government must concentrate on in this budget? According to you, those 2-3 important things, given the fact that we are fearing recession.
Well, I think, as I wrote in the article that you referred to, the theme of this budget should actually be jobs. Because unemployment is possibly the biggest problem in the economy today. There's a lot of unemployment that's visible, but there's a lot more unemployment that is not visible. So, just to give you some broad numbers, I think about 12 million people join the labor force every year. The economy is not able to create even half as many jobs. So the unemployment problem is growing year by year. And as I said in my introductory remarks, that the job of the budget is not only to accelerate the growth rate, but also to ensure that the benefits of growth are widely shared. And the way of ensuring that the benefits of growth are widely shared is actually to focus on creating jobs. Now, there is no simple or single solution to a problem as complex as job creation. But there are certain things that the budget can do. The PLI scheme, for example, has forward and backward linkages, which are MSMEs. So PLI is to some extent helping create jobs. PLI must be expanded. In fact, if PLI is expanded to some labor-intensive sectors, for example, toys, I think that will help. The second solution that I can think of for jobs is exports, because exports are job-intensive. Exports, 40% of exports are manufactured in the MSME sector, which generates jobs. So if the budget can come out with some measures to promote exports, I think that'll be very helpful. I'm not talking about incentives. We've been through all that, and it's been a big job getting out of all the export incentives. I'm talking about, for example, reducing the tariffs on imports, because exports are import intensive. They import components and parts. So to the extent that tariffs on imports are reduced, I think exports will get a boost.
Thank you very much for your time, sir. Thank you so much for joining us. All right, let's
now
turn our focus.
Good talking to you.
Great talking to you, sir. Thank you.